As always, yet another BeSci.io fireside chat. This time is a really, I think, important one because I have the pleasure of talking with Samir, who does BeSci at EY's sort of consulting arm. And I want to talk about, consultative behavioral science and sort of particularly inside of a big consultancy. We're going to talk about how Samir sort of came here because I think he has kind of a unique path. And we're also going to talk about him and fun things. So Samir, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. Looking forward to it.
So, I got to start canonically, like, why BeSci? Like, where did this happen for you? How did we get here?
Extremely random, I'd say, Matt, but found my calling. So I'll just do a quick kind of my path here. I graduated undergrad 2007, which the math is getting hard for me, right? So 17 years or so. I did a few years of sales, then I was doing operations, mostly at Merrill Lynch. And I was one of those trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my low to mid 20s. So I did what.
Well, wait, you're going way too fast. We got to slow way down here. So wait, you're in college and you study business, right?
I did. I studied business.
And what was the, it was like, well, this is a thing that'll have a career afterwards. This is something your family like, how did business sort of come about for you?
Okay, yeah. Well, dating way back, I was the kid that would have my parents go to Costco and we would buy everything in bulk, and then we'd go to these family extended friends social events. I would be selling, the Cokes for $1. So I kind of had, I think,
you had an entrepreneurial bug early on.
Exactly. Many failed small businesses. I think once I was trying to be a greeting card creator. So if you needed to create a birthday card or a Christmas card, I wanted to do that for you when I was in middle school. I had 0 customers.
0 customers, but a really strong business plan.
Exactly.
So you laugh, but this is why I wanted to slow you down, because this is the kind of, this is a theme we've heard before on the show, is that, a lot of applied behavioral scientists had an early entrepreneurial bent where, there was a part of them very early on that seemed to be in this sort of customer finding space. So this is not surprising. So you're entrepreneurial. And so then it makes sense when you go to college, you're like, and the entrepreneurial thing is business.
That's exactly right. I don't know how much deep reflection or thought I put into that decision, but it was more of an intuitive, okay, I want to do something in business. I didn't know what that something was. And then I got to college, and maybe to just give a little more context, I am first generation American. My parents grew up in India, had an arranged marriage there. So they met twice for an hour, then came out here. So grew up in Maryland and Virginia. So thinking about, maybe why BeSci as first gen in the late 80s, 90s, you feel my name's different. You look a little different. So I think I was very observational and trying to figure out how to navigate. And I'm the eldest child of 2. So I didn't really have my parents to maybe guide me on the culture here. And I was just sort of learning from my own experiences. So maybe that'll come into play later as we talk about my passion for behavioral science.
And so was that, I know you can see it in retrospect. Did you see it at the time? Did you see, was there sort of this like, I am a mini cultural anthropologist trying to make my way through the world, or are you just like trying to survive American school and making those? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't think I recognized it at the time. I think I was trying to learn it and navigate it, right? How can I fit in, and how can I be the person that has, what the prom queen has, to use a very terrible metaphor there.
No, but I mean, I think it makes sense. I mean, much of the struggle to understand culture is to understand our own otherness. So that, I mean, so when you're in college, did you get a chance to sort of take psychology, sociology, anthropology, or was, is Maryland sort of a like, you're in business and you're in business and you're in business?
I had the opportunity, but I don't think yeah, let's see, who do we have on this call here? Okay, I'll be completely candid. So you leave the first generation Indian household, right, where there's in high school, it's sort of you have to go to school and you have to do your homework. And my mom was looking at my homework. It was taken seriously. Right. So grades were good. You get to college, all of a sudden, you don't have any of those, yeah, promoting or inhibiting pressures. And I was interested in the school, but I was also just interested in being free, being free from sort of, you know, very maniacally education focused parents to, hey, now I can just have a good time, yeah, join a fraternity. And yeah, I didn't make all of my 8 a.m. classes. So it's part of the reason that I think later in my mid 20s, I realized, hey, I actually want to go back to school to do the MBA, and then eventually a third degree.
So you come out of, so you sort of go into college, you get sucked into the college experience, you have sort of the like neoclassical, fraternity sort of version of college experience. And then you go out into the world, and what's your first, what do you sort of crash land into, right? Is this where you sort of, join CEB, which is now Gartner?
Yes, and it was in a sales role. So when you don't have a 4.0 in undergrad in business and you're not recruiting for banking internships, uh, sales is typically a good way in, because it's mostly just prove your worth. Now there was a base salary and all of that, but it was a 100 call a day, smile and dial in a room full of other eager young folks that all wanted to do well so that they could move on.
And were you a good salesman?
I would say I put in the exact amount of effort to meet all of the quotas, and spent the rest of my time trying to figure out, okay, I don't want to be making 100 calls a day. Although in retrospect, that was the best experience I could have had just in a career, when you're every single day just getting rejected 98% of the time. Or you're lucky if 5 will even answer, if even 5 administrative assistants will answer, and maybe 1 executive will accidentally effectively take your call, and you've got 30 seconds to pitch them on, hey, can I get another meeting? That was a sort of valuable lesson for me that I think about, and I coach my teams on, is just that mentality of being proactive and sort of pleasantly persistent will take you places. And the reason I bring it up, Matt, is as I've reflected on the journey to start building the behavioral science business at EY, it's taken a whole lot of being comfortable with rejection and being comfortable with, hey, you might not agree with what, you might not understand or agree, but I'm going to be persistent.
Yeah, I think that again, that's another theme that we've heard, and people get at it different ways. I remember I went to a very small college, Swarthmore, and so I burned through my subject pool extraordinarily early in the semester, right? Like if I wanted to run more experiments, I was going to have to go off campus. And so I used to like stand in the 30th Street train station in Philadelphia as people were waiting for their Amtraks and try and get them to agree to like take my survey or participate in my experiment. And you just, there's nothing more humbling than standing there in a t-shirt trying to be like, I'll give you $1 to fill out this survey 8 million times, of which, to your point, 7 million of those people will reject you entirely or think that you're crazy. And, and so there is that persistent notion that I also think goes to your theme of experimentation, which I know we're going to talk about later, because some experiments fail. You have to be willing to sort of, if people come into behavioral science so conditioned to success that they can't see a failure, that they can't let something die, right? Then we get the sort of made up data and other kinds of things that can happen. And so I love that. So you're smiling and dialing, right, at Gartner, and you know desperately that's not it, right? You were even at Moody's for a hot second, right?
Yes, so that was my escape out into still a sales role, but a much more comfortable one, doing something that I thought was much more interesting, selling rating software. So Moody does credit ratings for large corporations and governments, et cetera, rating debt. They had a tool that effectively could help corporate treasurer types model out what in different scenarios their rating impacts might be. So it was a little more on the software side, and I got to move to New York, which was something I always wanted to do and thought I would do for a couple of years. And fast forward, 15 years later, I'm still here.
And so at this point, I know you spent some time at CEB. Like, trying to figure out not sales. At this point, if I asked early 20s Samir, like, hey, what's your career going to be? Did you think it was going to be in sales, or are you having an evolving idea of like where you're going, or it still feels a little lost?
I think at that point, especially being at a company like Moody's, where the successful folks in the organization I was in were doing very, very well and seemed to have a great lifestyle, I would have thought, okay, I'll stay here if I can be successful here. It seems like a good life. However, I joined Moody's at the end of 2008, which is a very, very bad time to be selling a nice to have software in the industry. So that saw the writing on the wall and got out to something more stable, and that's how I ended up at Merrill Lynch at the time. They were in the process of being acquired.
And why Merrill Lynch? Why like business analysis? Like, how did that sort of come about?
Again, a very, very random, trying to find something that was stable, that wasn't going to rely on me selling, in the middle of the crisis. And because of the acquisition, there was a ton of work to be done. I didn't quite know what I was signing up for. Just took, okay, this sounds like a stable role. There's work here, so I don't have to worry about potentially not having a job, which is frightening for most.
100%. And what did the work end up being?
It was something I had never thought about before, but behind the equity trading desk, right? So you've got whether it's institutional traders at Bank of America or Merrill, or their wealth managers that are executing trades. I always thought of it as, okay, you hit the trade button. There's actually a 6,000 person global operation that supports the execution of all trades. And specifically what I was doing is there is an internal tool or product for traders, trade support, wealth managers, et cetera, when they had an issue, which was quite often, to submit effectively a ticket. And so, hey, there's something looks wrong here. So what does that product look like? And again, this is 2009, 2010 at a legacy institution, very, very legacy institution. So I use the word product kind of lightly. There was no talk of agile even until I think 2015, 2016 on at these large firms, which through EY we helped many with. But back then it was sort of, you're not focusing on experience at all, but it was interesting to me to think about, okay, there need to be enhancements, and we're getting feedback from these users. So I would say it was fine. It was interesting. I liked it, but I also knew this can't be it forever.
Mm-hmm. So you're taking in these requests and chasing down what's wrong. When you find what's wrong, like, are they typically systemic issues and then you're going and fixing the systemic thing? They're just like, someone wrote the wrong thing and now I have to fix someone wrote the wrong thing. Like, because again, I'm going to tie all these threads together, right? Because you're doing a bunch of problem solving here about something went wrong, right? And a lot of times when behavioral science gets pulled in, it's because something is in air quotes wrong, because people aren't behaving the way that we sort of want them to be. Like, are these mostly systemic things and mostly individual things? Like, how does this sort of play out for you?
Yeah, and to clarify, Matt, the role was effectively a product role. So the tool was delivering tickets to different support teams that would go kind of fix what was wrong or analyze what was wrong. Where I was more, what's the future of the tool? What features do we need to add? And communicating with all of those stakeholders, especially the users, to get direct feedback.
Oh, so you got to do product, which is another common theme we hear.
It was, it's funny in retrospect, it was product, but there was no structure really, like, at all. It was basically just however I thought I should handle it. And my boss was very cool and just, okay, as long as people are happy, it's okay.
So you had a lot of autonomy.
Yes.
You're like, this is the polite way of saying that. Yes, lack of structure, lots of autonomy. We're gonna make it sound good.
You read that well.
Thank you. I try. And then all of a sudden, you sort of decide that we're going to do EY and business school and other kinds of things. So why an MBA? You like are there, you're doing product, and then you decide, hey, I'm going to go to Cornell. What happens in that sort of period?
Yeah, I think I've always viewed myself as I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And it was good. And the culture there, the people, it was legacy Merrill Lynch, a lot of 20, 30 year veterans, and they were awesome to work with. And I remember when I spoke to my MD about applying to business school, she's kind of like, what do you mean? Just keep doing what you're doing. And she meant it in the most like loving way. Keep doing what you're doing. One day you'll be in my shoes. And that sort of like lit the fire under me of, oh my gosh, this is going to be my next 30 or 40 years if I don't do something and I don't know what I want to do. So I went to business school to figure it out.
I know it's what made you certain that continuing on that path, like, you looked down that and said, when you were Moody's, you were like, hey, 30 years here might not be so bad. What about Merrill Lynch made you go, maybe 30 years isn't the right answer?
Another great question. I think it's going to go back to the entrepreneurial sort of role, right? In sales, at least you kind of control the outcomes for yourself. Whereas at Merrill, it was more of an operations, a process product type of role. And I didn't see maybe enough upside to be attractive. And I don't just mean financially. I mean, the ability to make a big impact, right? This is one of hundreds of internal tools.
Right. Yeah. So that impact piece comes along and you're like, all right, the way to get an impact is an MBA. Do you would you go back and do an MBA? Do you think people should do MBAs? Like, tell me a little bit about as a guy without an MBA, should I go get an MBA?
For people like me that I learn well in a structured environment is what I've come to figure out about myself, and that different people have different learning styles. And I've been around a lot of folks, especially in consulting, both senior and folks that are just a couple of years out of college that are truly amazing. What they've been able to learn behavioral science just through online courses, reading, and doing some hands-on kind of work. For me, I think I needed hey, you got to sit down and learn this, and we're going to grade you. We're going to test you. So for me, again, personally, my experience I didn't really know what I wanted to do. It just put me in an environment where everyone's either knows what they want to do or is trying to figure it out. And it was a bit of a boot camp. And from a career perspective, the good and the bad, right? When you go to one of these top whatever business schools, they do a very good job with placement because it affects their rankings. And so that's great because I took out loans to go to school. However, I actually applied to school with a little bit of a different career path in mind. So I had done a lot of work in nonprofits in New York City while I was at Bank of America, and had become kind of fascinated by, I don't know if you remember Tom's Shoes.
Of course. Yeah. The sort of, give and get model.
Exactly. So I thought, oh, wow. Social impact is what it was called at the time. I think now more ESG. And I wrote my essays about corporate social responsibility, and I wanted to get into that field. Cornell had a ESG program. And I got there, and again, very, very big loans. And they're like, you start recruiting basically your second week. And they're like, hey, do you want to be an investment banker? Do you want to be a marketer? Do you want to be a consultant? Or you can roll the die, and maybe at some point someone will give you a free internship for ESG type of work.
Very motivating, that.
Yes, I became very motivated by that fear, and just, okay, consulting seems to make sense.
Mm-hmm. What did you, are there things you use now that you feel like you got from business school? Skills, other than a bit of a path? Like, what things did you learn in business school that you are still using on a daily basis as a behavioral scientist?
I think I learned a ton in business school about strategy, storytelling, how to communicate with stakeholders and executives, our clients, how to work with very diverse teams. They're very intentional. At Cornell, and I think at most schools, we had a core team of 5 or 6 students, and they use an algorithm to basically put people with extremely different backgrounds, experiences together. So you're forced, and it kind of felt forced at times. It's intentional so that they're getting you ready for the real world, where it's not as easy as just, hey, if they think like you, they're similar to you, you can just execute. You need to understand how to communicate with different folks. So for me, the things I learned in business school, without them, I don't know if I'd gotten to where I am now.
I love that. I think that, so much of this phase of applied behavioral science, and maybe it won't be this way someday, right? Like probably marketers don't have to justify their existence every day. But like, in this phase of behavioral science, that ability to work cross-functionally and cross-culturally and at different stakeholder levels becomes so important.
100%. And what I'd say is what's great about consulting, right? Which we can we can talk more about consulting generally. But what's great about consulting at these big firms is I noticed it from day one in 2015 is, senior folks in consulting have senior relationships with large institutions. So if you can make a compelling case and if you can be persuasive, then you actually have the opportunity, because you're talking to decision makers. So you actually have the opportunity to make an impact at a big firm. So you can kind of convince people that matter. Then there's a whole other set of challenges that come afterwards, right? Because there are more people involved.
And why? So you come out of business school, you're sort of talking to the consultancies, picking the consultancies. What stood out about EY for you?
EY was, so one, they were very aggressive with my resume, right? EY, they have a slightly different model than the other big four and large consulting firms, in that we actually split out our financial services vertical, which encompasses consulting, transactions, audit, and tax, as its own business unit, its own entity. And then you have kind of the rest of the matrix as a separate entity. So because I didn't come up with this model, but what I've heard is this was the differentiator in the market to say, hey, look, you're not going to have a consultant that was on an agriculture project last month, right? Our consultants only work in the financial services domain, so all of the foundational kind of terminology, language, etc., we're comfortable with. So they were aggressive with me, and aggressive. I should say they were more persistent. And then in the conversations themselves, it was just kind of striking to me how conversational every interview felt with even the most senior partners. And I was also, I was looking at consulting, but I was also looking to be potentially a private banker. Again, I have many interests, Matt. That's always been a challenge of mine. I was the only one in my business school class that was in 2 what we call career working groups. So I was recruiting for consulting and I was recruiting to be a private banker. So I was, Ithaca to New York City every week to talk to JP Morgan, Credit Suisse, Goldman, those types of firms. And so there was also a stark difference between those interviews and the friendly coaching I was getting. Hey, make sure you eat a salad for lunch, and during the internship you're sitting at your desk till 10 p.m. with the journal out, versus at EY, which was, I just felt more of a human to human connection.
Yeah, a convivial vibe. I want to double click on something for a second, in that you talked about how EY is different and splits out their sort of finance vertical and their industry specific vertical. Do you think that's helpful? I mean, how much do you, as you've now matured as a behavioral scientist, how much do you feel like industry knowledge really helps you day to day? Or, if I came to you with something outside of financial services, you'd sort of say, smile and nod and say, yeah, I think this is more or less the same thing. Because there is often a debate about this sort of like, we have some behavioral scientists, who spent their whole career in health or their whole career in finance. And then there are other people who've worked sort of horizontally across a lot of things. And so I'm always curious about this sort of, as you reflect, I'm not asking you to tell me why what to do, but as you reflect on that, do you think it's a genuine differentiator that people are sort of working on finance all day, every day?
So depending on how we're framing the question, I think from a behavioral science perspective, it's not as important.
Hmm.
I think I would feel just as comfortable going into healthcare to try to solve a behavioral science challenge. Sure, I might not be as fluent in the literature, but I think because it's so process based, it's okay. From a pure consulting, so I'd say, before we did behavioral science, I do think it helps a firm like EY to have folks that understand not just the products and the kind of taxonomy and language that's used in this industry, but also the culture of the firms. If I'm saying that politically correct way, and it has a very unique feel to it. Like every large institution is effectively an aggregation of many acquisitions over the years, and there's a ton of sort of legacy way of thinking, legacy technology, legacy patchwork. So just from a true traditional business technology consulting, I do think it helps to have people that just know that on day one and don't have to be taught every time.
Yeah, so you have cultural navigators, right,
Yes.
who understand the internal part of a firm. That's a really interesting and sort of a lovely articulation of, it's not so much necessarily about the industry specific knowledge as it is knowing the tribal culture of the people that you're working with. Because there are many routes to the same mountain, right? Like everybody, you can get there in really, really different ways. And so I could definitely see where having a cultural navigator as you're doing your applied behavioral science work, who understands how those things are connected, et cetera, makes a ton of sense. So you join EY, you're like doing the consulting thing. And then, you're many years in when you decide that sort of you're going to go do your BeSci degree at LSE, which I do want to talk about. But where does BeSci enter the picture and how?
Yeah. So first few years was just trying to learn how to do consulting, and was learning a lot about the industry. Even though I came from the industry, right, that product role at the tool at Merrill was not really the industry. And when you're in consulting, you're with a lot of smart and highly motivated people. So just a totally different pace of work than my previous experience at Merrill, which makes sense, right? Clients are paying a lot of money for production, if you will. So I was learning, and at the same time, our clients, again, all of the large banks, wealth managers, insurance firms, they were responding to the supposed threat of fintechs, broadly speaking. So you had Betterment and Wealthfront and Personal Capital on the wealth management side, right? And then you had your Chimes and SoFis. And so the first questions were kind of at the board level. What is this? Is this something we need to even monitor? And then it quickly, not for market share reasons, but I think more for publicity reasons, these firms felt they needed to invest in similar types of technology, which frankly, from a customer experience perspective, this industry has always been a laggard. Financial services, right? What were the great innovations in this industry before fintechs came along? I think mobile deposit is probably the one that stands out. Yeah, no innovation within a bank branch really until the last maybe 5 or 10 years. So it was ripe for innovation, and so I really credit the fintechs for forcing the incumbent firms to have to have to actually think about their customers and the process they have to go through. And should it take 14 days to apply for a mortgage with, notaries and fax machine? Like, is there, or can you just use a better Rocket Mortgage? So it was a really, really fascinating time, I think, in the industry. And we were doing a lot of work to help these firms build apps, client portals, prospecting flows, discovery flows. How do you change a complicated financial planning tool that an advisor would use with a client? How do you transform this into something that on an iPad in a coffee shop, that same advisor could maybe be sitting with a client or prospective client or the child of that client, and in an interactive way, profile the few data points that are important. What's your current sort of assets, and when do you want to retire? How much you think you'll need in retirement? Just sort of those basic foundational questions, which, by the way, nobody teaches you in the U.S. educational system on whether it's short-term personal finance or long-term sort of retirement. But getting to work on those tools and thinking about the experience for the consumer, and then getting to plug in my own numbers of like, oh, I'm 32 at the time, and if I want to retire at 65, like how much money am I going to need? Nobody ever had kind of framed the question that way, right? It was always retirement is, oh yeah, like as soon as possible, I'd love to retire. Oh, how much money? Like as much as possible is sort of how I thought about it. So for me, it was so relatable. And I'm going to get to actually answer your question now. Again, as consultants, you're in the middle of many stakeholders between business and product, technology, research, design. And there were so many times where I remember, and it gets tense at these levels sometimes, and people are, I don't want to say arguing, but arguing on conference calls from the same building, but in their own offices, arguing with each other over what should the menu navigation be? What color should the chart be, right? And they would kind of yell at each other, blue or green, and then, okay, EY, Samir, team, what do you recommend? And I just felt this gaping sort of, I have no idea. Like, I don't have a mental model to solve this question. Like, I just don't know.
So you were starting to recognize how much things were run by opinion and going, well, I don't want to just add another opinion, right? Like another uninformed opinion. You say blue, I say green, he says red. Like that's not, we haven't actually advanced anything anywhere. So interesting. So you have this concept of, hey, there needs to be behavior change. People aren't really educated about their finance. You recognize how miseducated you are about your own finance, right? Like, which is a great skill for behavioral scientists to have, to be able to look at oneself and sort of go, oh man, I don't even know what I'm doing here. Like, this is not so often it feels like, well, we're trying to solve problems for those uneducated, but really a lot of the time, we're not all that much more educated.
Exactly.
And then you hear people, and this happens particularly in finance, right? Very strong opinions based on absolutely nothing other than their own opinion, right? Because they're paid lots of money.
The hippo approach. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Person's opinion.
Exactly. Right. Like, I'm paid a lot of money. I must know what I'm talking about, as a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And so, we're going to do what I say. And I can argue with some other highly paid person about whose opinion is going to be more highly paid. And so you sort of recognize this isn't it, right? Like, I don't want to just give an opinion here. And that is that, but then how does that, like, where does that lead to be? How did you figure out that behavioral science was the way to answer that question?
Yeah, one more step happened.
Okay.
And so you've probably heard of the term financial wellness, which has become a massive marketing slogan over the last 5 or 7 years. But again, just so much of life is random, right? We think we control everything, but looking back, especially having this conversation, it's, wow, that was random, and sort of here we are today. And I'm found my passion, and I'm grateful every morning when I wake up that I get to do this work that I find interesting and seems to have value. But I ended up doing a financial wellness strategy project for a large firm, and the original value proposition was extremely rational. You've got all of the macro consumer stats. 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 unexpected emergency. 90% are underprepared for retirement. 50% are underinsured. Student loan debt's at an all-time high. And these consumers or employees are asking their employers for financial wellness as a benefit. They need help, right? They don't know where to go. And employers are saying they're losing productivity. due to that. Their employees are stressed and they're spending time, either at work or they're taking time off of work to try to figure out their finances. Great. Enter large financial institution with a digital financial wellness platform that has everything under the sun you can imagine. And frankly, Matt, they're well designed. I think they're got education content, all different formats of the blogs, articles, podcasts, and then you've got tools and calculators, and you can life event based. It's like, oh, I'm want to get married or I'm having a child. Like the experiences are good overall. So great. We help these companies launch, and what happens? Engagement is low single digits at best. And that's when I just started reading everything I could. I was going to non-financial firms to try to understand, like, why might someone not engage? And I think it was a BJ Fogg article on a random website. I don't know if you know BJ at all. I ended up doing his boot camp, which was awesome many years ago. But that's when it just sort of like, oh wow, there's a whole science in a domain. And I kind of had heard a few things. I'd heard of the book Nudge, but I hadn't actually bought it or read it. So I picked it up and just went down this cycle that many folks I think that are on this call or interested in this space, right, that got into Kahneman and Ariely and just fell in love with it, not only from the business perspective, but also just being able to think about my own sort of personal life, behavior. I had a small child at the time, now two. So thinking about, okay, how does this, how do I get my 2-year-old to watch maybe a little bit less of his Kindle or iPad? So all of these things were just kind of came into fruition at the same time.
Got it. So at the same time that at work, you're sort of spiraling down this like, well, I think I've made things that I think are right, but they are not resulting in the thing that I want. There must be a gap here. And then recognizing, which I love that you are so forward-footed about this, recognizing in your own life that you're like, hey, there's behavior change here, right? In my household with myself, right? Like, why don't I get myself to do the things I want? Why can't I get my kid to do the things that I want? When do you make the decision that like, hey, more, I know you said, was BJ's boot camp your sort of first like foray into this? Was that before or after LSE? Like, how'd you kind of get there to like, oh, hey, I need to get some more formal education versus like, hey, I'm going to continue to keep reading?
Yeah. So like exactly 4 years ago that I just came across BJ's stuff. And that's when I started reading Nudge and all that. I didn't do his workshop for another year after. But I don't know if you can sense this. I'm sort of reactive and can make impromptu and decisions. So EY has this nice like 5 or 7 day break between Christmas and New Year's. And I just was so like, I became infatuated with the topic. I probably had been around it for a month or two. And I remember I was home in Maryland with my family, with my parents. And I remember I actually went to the public library for a couple of days. So while everyone was just hanging out, I just was reading and I was thinking, I knew there was a program at LSE. And so I was thinking like, would this make sense to apply to? I can't go, my wife will kill me if I try to go back to school one more time, but I feel like I have to do this. And I started just drafting a pitch, like a verbal pitch that I would give to the head of our business, January, like literally 2 weeks after that public library, where I was just, how am I going to pitch this? How am I going to talk about the value of it? Who's doing it, right? That, we're behind already, what the return would be. So just getting all of that together. And it was just like something burning inside of me that said, you got to go back to school and you got to try to build this formally.
I love that. Do you still have do you remember the pitch? Right? Like there's a lot of people on this call who are facing similar sort of pitches in their life, whether they're pitching a business to fund them or pitching themselves on whether this is a good idea. Do you remember sort of, what you felt like really clinched the conversation?
Yeah, I don't know if it was clinched, but I'd say just structurally, it's always starting with an example of irrationality, right? When we do these kind of lunch and learn 101s, we'll do games or quizzes, right, to just help people see. And I'm sure Matt, you do this all the time as well. I've seen some of yours, just so that people realize it's not they are irrational. It's, oh, like all of us are susceptible, and then typically go into, here are the firms that are using it, and here's how, right? And there's various examples. I think I've used the Netflix autoplay many times verbally. We don't know 100% if that's purely a behavioral trick or they're trying to actually just mimic what it was like to flip a channel on a TV. However, that the data shows that when you have the autoplay, people watch a lot more. And
so as someone who gave their first job talk at Netflix, I can tell you that was behaviorally, certainly the continuing autoplay function was behavioral science informed, right? There was a notion that that the TV-like experience was one that people were sort of used to, and that there was a lot of benefit to being able to switch through channel-like things. And there's much experimentation has been done that did not see the light of day, but there's a lot there.
I bet I would love to hear more in the right.
We can have a whole non-recorded conversation about that one. All right, so you're giving some examples, and then you sort of say, and the best way for us to catch up to other firms is for me to go to LSE.
Yeah, a couple steps in between. There's making it real with kind of consumer products, and then talking about it in the context of financial services. We have the data for auto enrolled plans in retirement, right? And that's what Thaler won the Nobel Prize for. It's like damning. It's 90-something% of employees will enroll in a 401k and contribute when you have the auto enroll, which is just everyone knows now the default. You can opt out, versus I've seen anywhere from 30 to 60% without it. Right? And that's kind of the win-win-win value prop. And it just helps to explain, look, human beings, like when we don't know what to do, we go with the flow, right? Or we look to others. And so if the default is you enroll, then we'll go with the flow. And then Benartzi's kind of followed up with a lot of interesting, well, what should the default contribution rate be? Historically, it's been 3%. What happens if you raise that to 5, 7? He found that you can raise it up to 10%, and people will contribute 10% of their income instead of 3. That has a massive impact on retirement readiness for the person, and then assets under management for the firm. So talking about it in the context there, and then, hey, look, this is the type of work we're doing. We're helping our clients to drive some sort of behavior change, whether they call it that or not. Doesn't matter. Effectively, that's what they're trying to do. Trying to gain more customers. You're trying to keep more customers. You're trying to cross-sell, right? And I don't mean these as dirty words, but these are businesses, and this is what we're trying to help them do. Let's try to do it smarter. And then I just proposed, like, I basically told them I'm 100% doing this, and there's this program at LSE. Like, I would love for you to consider sponsorship of this, so that we can kind of build out this business. And first convo was over a drink. Then many slides were made, business case, all the stuff, and probably about 30 of those like pitch type of meetings over the course of the year. Was also COVID, which was threw a wrench in timing. But eventually, right, got the full green light. I actually already started the LSE program, and a month after it started, I got the official, hey, we'll pay for it.
Hey, there you go. I mean, sometimes you have to take a risk. I mean, you knew very passionately and I love that it originated from people are just slinging opinions around here, and I don't want to be another person slinging an opinion, which I think is such a relatable feeling, to be like, I don't want to feed this. I have opinions. Sure, I think it should be green, but like, it's also based on nothing. Right? Exactly. And there's like this egoless state that sort of says like, I will self-reject my own opinion because it doesn't have evidence, right? Because it is based on nothing other than my intuition. I love that. LSE program, thoughts on, masters and things. You mentioned earlier, you feel like formal learning is a thing that's really helpful for you. I feel bad that I made a self-paced course now. It's not for some people can do self-paced. So LSE provides the structure. How did you feel through the program? Recommend others?
Highly recommend. Also, the structure of a UK based program is very different than my experience doing the master's at Cornell, which is very much sort of the American system. You've got a curriculum, you've got almost homework assignments, you've got quizzes and tests, maybe 8 or 10 throughout the course. Whereas LC was, you've got 5 days of on-site learning, and then you've got 2 months to write 2 academic style papers, meaning almost the opposite of what what we do in consulting, right? Where we make big, bold proclamations just sort of based on intuition or experience. Whereas here, you could not make any claim without citing literature, as Matt, obviously, you have had to do many times. And so that was actually, it ended up being more self-paced is how I would describe it. Now there was like, you could go and talk to TA. It was an executive format, right? So I'm working at the same time. It's great camaraderie among our classmates globally. But at the end of the day, you're really learning it on your own.
Mm-hmm. Got it. But do you find having the formal degree to be convincing and helpful to people, clients and things? Or is it more that you know what you're talking about?
I think both are important. I think knowing what you're talking about is more important
for clients. Yeah.
And the way I have reflected on this often, because in the business world, especially in consulting, everyone's like, yeah, go ahead and do it. But before I had really even just started school, I was getting pulled into all of these random sort of, hey, we have a client that's trying, tell me the 3 things I need to know to get their customers to use digital self-service instead of calling in. And you're, oh my God, I started school and there's a whole process. It doesn't work like that. It's not silver bullet. But the expectation is like, hey, like, oh, you're the BeSci guy.
You're the guy. Do the thing.
Exactly. So the degree, I think, adds credibility, just generally, like any title or label. But it's really, for me, I think it was actually after I finished the program that I just didn't view finishing the program as finishing the learning. I almost felt like now I have more time to keep learning and sort of building on the foundation I had at LSE. But all these books and stuff here, right? I'm not the guy that gets a book and like reads it cover to cover. Any book that I think is interesting or gets recommended, I'll buy, and then I will, like, I've got your book right here, and I'm like folding and highlighting, throughout and starring and coming back to, like, really, like, this is how I learn. So it's like an everyday process for me that I just continue to learn. And I think as I've gained confidence there and been able to articulate it to clients who have then purchased our services, and then we're doing real behavioral work on the ground, right? I think it's sort of, that's how the credibility is being built. But it's a step by step, day by day kind of thing.
Got it. I love that you're not looking at books more encyclopedic, right?
Yes.
Sort of, this is a reference material. I can come back to it. I can start. I can, rather than like, great, I read Hooked. I can get rid of this book. I now know everything it has to teach me. Off it goes, right? You see them as reference material that you can come back to and come back to and come back to. I love that.
And maybe that's because I don't have maybe the talent that others like you might have, where you can just memorize a full book and all the insights.
I don't know that it's a talent thing. I like this approach. I mean, I think the publisher, one of the things you have very little control over in publishing is the title of your book. What's inside, very much you. What's on the outside, very much them. And I was like, let's call it like the Encyclopedia of Applied Behavioral Science. And they're like, that's a terrible name. We're not calling it that. But it is how I meant it to be reference material, process material, much like an instruction manual or something, the handbook. I think I
Yeah.
want to call it the
Yeah.
Handbook of Applied Behavioral Science. And they were like, no, you can't call it that. But I love that. So I love that you're doing that and picking that up through the thing. And now you're sort of leading, BeSci for EY. How's that going? I mean, I think of the sort of big four, lots of them have behavioral science sprinkled around in them, but there's a pretty major commitment to sort of build out this thing. How's it going? What's working? What's not working? Like, where does it feel good? Where does it feel challenging?
Yeah, it's going great. We're about 2 years in, I'd say, of officially offering behavioral. Very much the way that it's worked is prove it. So we're not starting with investment and then hoping you could sell. It's figure out. So that first year was a lot of insight sessions. Just, hey, there's this thing called behavioral science. Here's very similar to the pitch, right? Here's examples of other industries. Here's this industry. Here's how it could help you. Matt, everybody took that meeting. Everybody. I mean, it was chaos. I was, I don't know, 2 a week at different clients. It was a lot. And nobody bought anything because I hadn't figured out how to package what to sell. And so everyone was like, oh, this is great. But then there was just no immediate action for them to take. Also because I was trying to figure out how do we sell this exactly? Right. Because I'm also still at the time I'm starting school basically. So I'm starting school and I'm just talking about it. We have a ton of very intelligent and eager folks at EY that also gravitated towards this topic. So I feel very lucky that even to this day, there's a couple of folks I see on this call that have just spent their extra time. You always 2 jobs in consulting, your client work and your extra work. So many passionate folks that have invested nights and weekends with me to help figure out, okay, how do we package this? What thought leadership can we do? What experiments can we run internally? How do we teach others this internally to try to scale it a little bit? And it's a whole lot of, we'll just go down every avenue we can. We've made partnerships with a lot of the behavioral technology firms, so we can try to go to market together with academics, with applied folks. I view it very much as this is a community that has a very, like, the pie is large enough that everyone can share. And so how much can we just build relationships? We've got, we didn't talk about the Penn program where we talked about LSE, but Penn has a great master's program. They do a kind of an externship every year. So we've been doing that I think this is year number 3 of doing that, where I probably worked with 30 plus Penn students over the years where, hey, like, let's pick a topic, whether it's financial wellness or annuities or long-term care insurance or seeking wealth management advice. Let's pick these topics and let's just do kind of end-to-end outside of the, a real experience, but let's do the whole lit review and collect data and put together a point of view. And so it's every year, I think we've seen an escalation. Then it became more, how do you take this advice I got at the consulting firm, which is we already do everything. Take something we already do and behavioralize it, which is very helpful, right? We do like design thinking and product prioritization type of stuff. Said, okay, great. Like, we'll look at competitors, but let's first agree on, Matt, what's the objective here? What outcomes and so what behaviors are we trying to influence? Okay, so that went really well. We learned how to get clients to do that, and then to think about, hey, yeah, you're gonna have your experience maps. You got to layer in psychological barriers. It's still, though, it's when you're launching a new product, it's a massive effort with so many groups involved. So even though like we're behavioralizing that type of project, it is still 80% a traditional project.
Which is great. I mean, I love that I think sometimes people get in this place where they're like, well, if you're not doing, all 4 steps, strategy, insights, design, evaluation, then it's not behavioral science. And instead, I think to your point, it's more of a continuum, right? Like, even if the only thing I get somebody to do is write a behavioral statement, we are going to be more behavioral in nature, sort of more scientific in nature than if we hadn't got a behavioral statement. So even if I get people to do just one of the steps, that's a significant improvement. And it's interesting to me that it sounds like, you very much are working through the step. You sort of started with, hey,
Yes.
can we be very explicit about behavior? And then we sort of said, okay, well, we need to have things like pressure maps, and in particular inhibiting pressures, and then changing the way they're doing design. And I know you're also, the hardest one, having worked in consulting at Frog, is always the evaluation step. It's hard to get clients to agree to do piloting. And I know you've been working on that as an offering, that, trying to formalize an evaluatory offering, right? A pilot offering is sort of something you've been noodling on how does that come to life at EY?
Yeah, and I'd say that brings us to the last 6 months where and frankly, Matt, it's 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 your process. I'm thankful to you, right? That yeah, what do we reach out on LinkedIn at one point, 6 months ago or something? But you've shared so much about how you've done this, how you've achieved it, to me directly and through your book. So it's really just, hey, this is the process. You can do this in 8 weeks. We can do it in a pilot. We don't need to do this massive experiment right away. And so that we finally have not only figured out the offering, but have also started on one of those with a couple more ideally in the pipeline. Hopefully have some good proof points.
Which is really exciting. I mean, I think that to your earlier point, people look at what other people are doing, right? And so as you're able to be more forward-footed about evaluatory work, I think that lifts the industry up. And I know we're right up on time here. Thank you so much for coming and spending time. What I want to get you to do is come back again, right? In 6 months or so. And then tell us the results of some of these evaluations. Tell us how it's going. I mean, I think, but by far the number one complaint that I hear from folks is, each step is harder than the last one in terms of convincing. It's easy to convince people, relatively easy to convince people to like go through this, write a behavioral statement kind of session, right? But that, by the time you get to the pilot, people are like, I know, we know the answer. We have these insights, like we know things, and then they just are ready to go. And it gets harder and harder and harder to hold them back and try and hold them to this discipline. So I want to hear how that's going and how you're pitching. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with me today and being such a a powerful advocate for behavioral science. One of the things I loved and I want to end on is, you're not just doing it at EY, but you are giving back to the community. You're working with UPenn, right? You become a leader in your own right, even though there's something that you've come to more recently to say, hey, how do I bring along that next generation? We need that, right? We need people who are having the chance to apply this to bring along those next folks. And I so appreciate that as someone who loves the field and wants the field to grow. I love the way you're contributing to it. So thanks so much for coming and spending some time with us. Thank you for the wonderful work you're doing at EY and for proving that, you could be lost in the beginning. Not everybody figures that out in college, but you can get there and you can fall in love with it and you can really do the work. I've been so impressed. So many people who use the words and don't do the work. And every time you send me a case study, every time you share with me what you're doing, I love the way that you're actually doing the work. So congratulations to you and thank you so much and have a wonderful day. I know that you've got kiddos and things to get to, and I'll see you on down the road. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, everyone.